Sometimes when you are a reviewer, you're so scared of movies getting scars that you become the thing that scars them. Let's talk about Wolfman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we'll be discussing or debating Wolfman. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. Best recent things. Guys, what's the best recent thing you've seen?
I'm kind of going to get in and get out because I didn't get a chance to watch too much. And the one thing that I actually was enjoying watching, and that was Conclave. For those that haven't seen it, or no, for those that have seen it, there is a review on our channel where these two gentlemen here did a review. I was kind of missing in action on that particular day. It's essentially just like a story about like these religious leaders and they're trying to select a new pope. There's just like some like plotting and like secrets that are like sort of like being uncovered within it. Essentially, like I said, I kind of like fell asleep, which was really annoying because I was actually really enjoying the movie and I've not had a chance to kind of go back to it yet. From what I'd seen so far, it was really good. It was really interesting.
Were you awake for the ending?
Once I'd woken up, it was like I was watching it late. So by the time I woke up, I was like, let me just switch it off and I'll watch it again.
Okay.
When I can. So I didn't get to the end of the movie now.
Because it's the ending that's controversial. Because in my view, like it's a really tightly scripted political thriller up until the last 15 minutes, and then it just turns into moralizing when it could have been so much more. And we spent an hour talking on that when it came out. If you ignore the ending, it's probably one of the best political thrillers I've seen in years.
Yeah. So I did know your opinion on the ending. So I was keen to kind of get there and see what it's all about. But hopefully I might rewatch it. I might try to kind of like catch the rest of it this weekend, and then we can maybe have like a quick chat about it once I have seen all of it.
Yep.
What I've seen, I was in that zombie mode. So I was watching Resident Evil. For those who haven't seen that, that's pretty much a zombie apocalypse. Like literally, just about a zombie apocalypse. But obviously, they go to I don't know what type of facility it is, but like an underground facility, I believe. And then at the underground facility, that's where like all the people that worked at that underground facility turned into zombies. And then the team that was sent there went to go investigate what's going on. I think they went to go originally to go and save the people that were trapped there, but then obviously they didn't know there were zombies, and then there was just a fight for survival. And then it's a good one. Resident Evil is, for me, not the greatest, but I think it's more of the nostalgia for me, because that's what got me into the zombie genre and The Walking Dead. But yeah, so I'll definitely say Resident Evil, the first one. I say definitely go and watch that one, guys, if you haven't seen it.
Is that the early 2000s one?
I think it's early 2000s.
So there's like 6 of those or 5, and they get increasingly weird as time goes on. But I think the first ones are pretty solid.
Yeah. So it's got a few notable characters. Well, it's got Michelle Rodriguez, the one I was in Fast and Furious, and the Mila Jovovich. I don't know how to pronounce her surname, Jovovich or something like that. But yeah, weren't you the one that said her husband was the director?
Mm-hmm, yep.
Yeah.
Best thing I watched was The Righteous Gemstones, which is a 2019 HBO comedy drama about a family of televangelists. And essentially, it's about this family. So the father or the parents built this mega church, and they basically have these 3 adult children, and it's now becoming time for. So the mother died a few years earlier, and the father is nearing retirement, and he's kind of trying to get his adult children, whom he has been controlling or micromanaging their entire lives, into a point where they can take over the church. And the first season is largely about that flavor of religion, like, and the obscene amounts of money that are involved, and how it's more of a business than anything else and stuff like that. And this is like written by some comedians who come from that area. So this is very much informed by kind of their experiences growing up. And then the second 2 seasons kind of go more into like the family drama as the children take over, and they kind of try to kind of lead the church, and they have some teething problems, and there's all sorts of personal drama and everything. And it's just a pretty smart satire, where it's not at all subtle about what point it's making, but it's making it in a very entertaining and nuanced way, where you don't feel condescended to or preached to or something, ironically, about the message. It just shows these characters doing things, and the reasons and the ways that they do these things, and the reasons for doing them is the satire, right? And to the point where I've actually found Reddit posts from people who said, hey, I thought this was a satire, but it's not dunking on evangelicals nearly enough. Like where are the jokes, or where's the satire? And it's like, that is the satire. Like everything about it is like a very scathing indictment of like mega churches and stuff like that. But it's also just a well-written drama with interesting characters and well-realized characters. And it kind of manages to be completely absurd in one way, but also like really human in another. And so like I watched like the 3 seasons like in a little under a week. There's a 4th season coming. So like if you're just looking for like well-written drama and comedy and satire about like a not everyday setting, then I think Righteous Gemstones is a good pick.
The main event. Daniel, can you please tell the people what Wolfman is about?
So Wolfman is a horror movie about this guy who grew up in like a rural part of the United States. As an adult, he gets notified that his father, who had been missing for some time in the woods, has now been declared dead, and he has inherited like the family farm. And he has to go with his family to Oregon to kind of dissolve the household, essentially. And in doing so, he's kind of confronted with his own past, and they encounter a creature in the woods that infects the father, and so the father slowly loses his humanity over the course of much of the movie and kind of turns into the Wolfman. And the movie is essentially about what it's like to become a monster. So that is the basic plot of it. So what did we think of the Wolfman?
I actually really love those movies where you're not expecting much and turn out to be great, and this is one of them. This was a really good horror movie. Mainly due to its suspense and its simplicity, because it's not a complex film. It's not one of those. It's not like one of those movies that I don't think is going to win any awards. I don't think it should win any awards. However, it's definitely a film. It knows what it's doing. Like the makers behind it knew, okay, we're gonna go with this idea, and we're just gonna build on what we can do with the limited, even though I wouldn't say resources were limited, but in terms of like, because it's in isolation, there's a few characters, there's so much you can do with what with that environment that you've set. And I think the way that they've done it was just I really enjoyed this movie. Themes were executed perfectly for me, especially how the character turned out to be just like his dad. Obviously, I'm not going to reveal too much, but they just didn't overcomplicate things with this movie. And I was just always like, a lot of the times I was on my toes. And I was engaged with the character and their journey. I just wanted to see what was going to happen to them and how they were going to overcome the obstacles that they were up against, because it felt like it was so hard to see how they could have overcome those obstacles with the settings that they were in, because it was just like, it's a mum, it's a little girl, and it's her husband against a freaking werewolf. I don't know if they've done this before, but like there was like scenes where I'm not really gonna go into it, but there's a scene where you're kind of like in the eyes of the werewolf, and you kind of see how he's changing, like his transform, like it adds to his transformation, especially when you see through his eyes. It was really nice to see. I really enjoyed this movie.
I'm a little mixed on it. I don't know if I like it or if I don't like it. There definitely was like really sort of kind of like good elements of it. The whole slowly transforming into a wolf, and sort of kind of like how they visualized it, how like the father was acting when he was like sort of in this transition, stuff like that was like really, really cool. I mean, some of the character choices were like very questionable, is to say the least. John, I know you said that you liked the themes. I thought it was pretty lackluster how they handled the themes, or they were very clever in terms of like how they like played it out in sort of kind of like metaphors, in terms of like how people were acting and sort of like what was happening on screen, and we were sort of touching that a little bit more into the spoiler section. So I'm like even mixed on sort of that aspect of it. I do agree as well. Sort of scene where it was like the sort of the mother and daughter's POV, and they kind of compared it to sort of the wolf's POV, and like how like that was changing. Something that was like pretty cool, and something that I hadn't sort of seen done before. And it was interesting visuals. I do feel like the ending for me was like a little bit drawn out, and it was a little bit like, okay, let's just kind of like get to the end. And I think that was maybe more so because I was kind of like getting fed up with some of the character decisions. It never really felt like anything bad was going to happen. So I was a bit like, okay, can we just kind of get to the end? Because we're kind of like playing out this like really long, drawn out sort of chase scene between the two. In general, it was cool, but it wasn't. I don't know. I kind of like it. I kind of don't. I don't know. we'll talk about it. And by the end of the discussion, I think I'll have more of a clearer say on to whether I really do like it or if I don't like it at all.
So I think there's two halves to this movie. There's the plot, which is about the family goes to Oregon. They encounter some kind of creature in the woods. Father gets scratched, turns into same creature, loses his humanity, realizes he's becoming a monster. That part I think is wonderful. You just take the plot by itself. It's suspenseful. It's well paced. I think it even looks good. The problem is that the other half is the movie informs you that this is a story about emotional trauma and generational trauma and things like that. And it simply outright isn't. And in fact, a lot of the story choices in this movie actively undermine that theme to the point where it actually ends up saying the opposite, in my opinion. It is not simply like a subtext you can ignore or just one or two lines that you can kind of wave past. This is a significant chunk of the movie, and the movie tells you over and over what it's about, and it's just not true. And that is something that I really had a hard time looking past. And if I could kind of tear apart those two halves and look at them as separate things, then each individual half would be better. But together, they actively fight each other. And so for that reason, I ended up enjoying myself whenever people were not talking about the important message. And every time they did, I said, no, you've just shown me the opposite. What are you doing? The most fascinating or interesting thing about this movie is how somebody who has made this his brand, right? Like Leigh Whannel had made the Invisible Man a few years ago. Did you guys see that one?
Oh, I've been avoiding that one. I need to watch it, but apparently that didn't really get good reviews.
So I did not see it either, but like every review I heard about it was raving about how good it is. So essentially, but that one takes kind of the story of the Invisible Man and turns it into a story about controlling and abusive relationships. Because like the Invisible Man, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. Sorry, I was speaking about the Slender Man. Sorry, Invisible Man, yeah, was a good one. I watched that one. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So, and the Wolfman is kind of doing the same thing, right? It's taking a classic movie monster and it's turning it into an allegory for like one of the big topics of the day, right? And that's a fine thing to do. But by all accounts, the Invisible Man did this really well, and it's like hard to screw up, right? Like it's kind of obvious. It kind of writes itself. And Wolfman is kind of similar. This should be pretty straightforward, but the movie manages to not do it in that way, in a way that actually works and actually hangs together. And that is kind of fascinating. Just how like these, I don't think like we'll go into the details of how much this doesn't work in the spoiler section, but it's actually like the messages are diametrically opposed, and I have no idea how that happened. I kind of want to find out, because it seems like almost like that took more work than just doing the obvious thing. But yeah, for that reason, I ended up not really enjoying this, because the parts I enjoyed were actively fighting the parts, like the other half of the movie. And if I have to do that much work separating different parts of a movie in order to find something to enjoy, then I'm not enjoying the movie. So for that reason, I walked away kind of frustrated with this movie. Right, let's talk about it.
I think they did kind of like, they stayed consistent to what the message was. Like, of course, they didn't do it to the same degree as Invisible Man, like you said, because I think with Invisible Man, it was more complexly done. Whereas this one, I think it was pretty much straightforward. And where I think it was straightforward and how they stayed consistent with the theme of kind of, being passed down the anger, like that being hereditary. I think like throughout the movie, the message was, or another message was that he was trying to not turn out to be like his dad. But he ended up being like his dad, especially when a big reveal happened with now one spoiler section where, the antagonist was actually his dad. And then he ended up becoming his dad with the transformation. Firstly, with the anger in the scene where he shouts at his daughter, and then he tries to kind of hold that back in. Then with the werewolf, when he actually ends up becoming a werewolf. So there's three parts where there's like the transformation. So not only is he transforming into a werewolf, they show us the process of him transforming into his dad as well. With obviously you see signs of him being angry, like I said, with his daughter. Second sign was when he's transforming. And then the third sign is when he actually becomes. So
there's a fourth one.
What's the fourth one?
Because the wife becomes the grandfather when she becomes the hunter at the very end.
Yeah.
And I was going to get to that as well, but there's an additional point of similarity.
Yeah, and also why I think they were smart and they've kind of like still followed with the theme is because like the wolf, right? In many cultures and like mythologies, it's it's a symbol that's associated with unchecked rage, and that correlates with the character as well because obviously he's got a lot of unchecked anger in him that he didn't really address. Like he's fighting against it because he even said a scene, like when he was shouting at his daughter, he says, "I'm trying to not be like that. I won't be like that," or something like that. So he does acknowledge it, but he never really addresses it. And there was a scene when he's looking at his wife when he actually when he pretty much transformed, right? And then he's about to attack his wife, and then they just have a moment where they look at each other. It was like that's when he actually finally realized that, oh crap, I'm my dad. In a way, I'm a werewolf, and the werewolf was his dad. So he's like, I'm my dad, and I'm gonna kind of like, you know what I'm saying, walk away, if that makes it. That, he ends up walking away. So they did follow on with the theme. I can't even say that it was simply done because, like I said, the wolf. That's kind of like the wolf, like obviously the wolf symbolism, and obviously the character's theme. That's kind of hard to do. It's not easy to do what they just did there. So I don't think it was simply that. I think this was actually it was done really well.
The very first problem is that like the whole movie is on this crutch that sort of this father was abusive to his son and he doesn't want to pass down that generational trauma. But is the father really that abusive? Like all we see is him kind of like hop out of bed and neatly kind of like quickly make sure his bed's like done like really neatly or whatever. And then the second time is like the kids run off in the woods when they're like hunting deers and like there's like other threats that could potentially be in the woods. And the father is just like angry at him and he's saying like, I'm trying, like I have to be the one that protects you essentially. Like you can't just like run off and you can't do that. And it's not like really done in like a cruel or abusive way. We're like not really showing that the father is that abusive to the son. So like when the movie's like really hanging on this, you really have to like sell us on the idea that the father was a really bad parent and sort of what he's saying to his kid and like how he's saying it isn't the right way to do it. And I can't see that it's not really, because again, if you're in a dangerous situation, you don't want your kid running off and doing his own thing, and you have to reiterate the point that like, there could be dangers out there. You have to think about what you're doing essentially. So that's like my big problem with sort of the themes in this movie is that initially, like really off the bat, we're starting off really poorly with this, with sort of how you're laying out the themes. And Daniel, I don't know if you want to add anything more to kind of like that part of it.
We're seeing it from our lens, right? That okay, that's not really abusive, but in the lens of a child, a lot of the time, especially like now, a lot of the times, like we're very like, I wouldn't say we are very sensitive, right? So back in the day, we would be like, that's not abusive. But a lot of people would be like, yo, that is abusive traits or that is abusive. But like in the eyes of a child, he's seeing those fits of rage maybe as abusive. I just took it as okay, the things that the child ended up picking up from the father was those fits of rage, that kind of like that inner anger, right? So I just saw it as okay, he's growing up in a household where he's isolated from the world, and he has a father who has moments like, he has moments where he has fits of rage moments.
But he says as an adult how abusive he doesn't say the word abusive, but he very clearly has the stance as an adult, as a parent, as somebody like late 30s, whatever. His father was a terrible parent because of how strict and stifling and borderline abusive he was. When he talks to his wife about his childhood, he basically says, I'm glad I got out. I left at 18, never looked back. Now in hindsight, I wish I'd had a better relationship with my father, but he made it impossible, right? That's basically what he says. And it is the movie's job to show us through the father's behavior that this is the case, if it is supposed to be the case. But what he actually does is, like Hervé, like you said, he like has got a bit of a militaristic tone, right? He uses like the military jargon for like 0700 instead of 7 a.m. And he expects his son to get up very early, make his bed immediately, like it's an army barracks, right? And then they go hunting and everything. He's certainly strict. Like the father is one of the most emotionally well-adjusted people in the movie, right? Like he marvels at the beauty of nature during that scene in the valley, right? And he's like, I've seen so many strict fathers in movies where authors are clearly processing like their childhood experiences. It's unusual if a father, at least like pre-2015 or something like that, actually is in touch with his emotions and is actually a well-rounded, well-adjusted person. And this father was not like this. He really got emotional at the sight of nature. When he talks, when they're sitting in like this lookout, they're basically waiting for the wolf to go away. He's talking to his son about how difficult it is to protect the people you love. And he's genuinely concerned. He's worried about his son and he wants to protect his son. That's the only thing he wants. Like, this is not an abuser. This is not strict to the point of being stifling. And then when, like Hervé mentioned, when he raises his voice, it's because the kid wandered off in the woods while there was a wild animal and there were guns being fired. I'm not a parent, but anybody who's ever been in charge of a child knows that, like, if the kid does something dangerous, you stop them first and make sure they realize they did something wrong, and then you work it out later. If the point of that scene was to convey how unreasonable and stifling the parenting of the father was, it did the opposite. Like, the guy came across as responsible and caring and everything, right? And that was clearly not the intention of the movie, but that is how he came across to me, right? And like, yes, I would not have wanted to grow up in a household as strict as this, but like there's a lot of air between that and actually being abusive. And then fast forward 30 years, and the son has now become a father, and he's walking through the busy city streets, and the daughter starts walking on the barricades, right? And he politely asks her to come down because it's dangerous. And she ignores him. And he asks a second time, she ignores him. He asks her a third time, she ignores him. And then I think the daughter jumps down and runs into some stranger, and the stranger snaps at her, and the father goes off on the stranger. How dare you talk to my child this way? Except that stranger was the only one in that scene doing the halfway responsible thing, when it wasn't even his problem, right? So my point here in all of this is his actual style of parenting that is portrayed as good and well adjusted and like in emotional balance and whatever is totally ineffective. It's like he's like, sooner or later his daughter's going to get hurt if he keeps doing this. And I'm not saying this as a proponent of strict parenting or anything like this, right? It's just about, hey, there's danger and it's your job to keep the kid away from danger. And so if it's more than that, if it actually is stifling, if it actually is scarring the way the movie says, then you have to show it. You have to do a little bit more legwork and you have to go a little bit harder than that to actually convey the idea that actually, yes, there is something wrong with the grandfather's parenting, and that there's this whole idea of breaking the cycle and it ends with us, right? That's a very popular thing right now, and especially in movies. Like, It Ends With Us was about that last year, and that was one of the biggest movies. This movie wants to go in the same direction, but it simply does not sell it. It actually says the opposite in many ways, because what the grandfather did during the hunt was actually the responsible thing, and what the son did when he's the father was actually irresponsible because he didn't stop the danger, right? And then we fast forward to the end of the movie. One of the things I look at in movies is like when I want to figure out like what a movie is saying or like what its theme is or what the bottom line is what saves the day in the end. And what does save the day in the end? It's picking a gun and shooting the bad thing to protect your child. That's what saves the day. And that's what the mom does. Now, first of all, the father does it, like out of kind of instinct. And then when the illness kind of incapacitates him, it falls to the mother. And the mother then picks up the gun and becomes the protector. They mirror her and the grandfather twice. Once in the lookout, right, where mother and daughter are in the same lookout that the grandfather and the father were in 30 years ago. And where like they're hiding in the lookout, and like the werewolf is kind of stalking around and is coming up the side and whatever. Very similar, like clearly referencing each other, right? And that is where the mom kills the father, right? But by shooting him, because he realizes he's holding on to a last shred of his humanity. And there's no going back. And the only way out is for her to kill him. Very, very strong scene. But in order to save the day, she has to pick up a gun and shoot the danger, right? And then the last scene of the movie is when they stand in front of this valley, and who look at the sunrise and they marvel at the beauty of nature in the exact same way that the grandfather and father did 30 years ago. Like the shot is identical. So my question here is, at what point are we breaking a cycle? At what point are we doing things better than the previous generation? Right? No, they had it like within the logic of this movie. They had it right all along. And actually, we need to remember that, because that's the only way to protect our children, right? That's what happens in this movie. And so that is what I mean by it does the exact opposite of what it purports to say and what it means to say. I think there's actually two possibilities here. One of them is that this movie is just really inept and does not realize what it's doing. And it kind of just has a message and has a plot, and the two aren't reconciled, they aren't harmonized. Or it got the movie greenlit by pretending to be about something that's fashionable right now, but then constructing a plot that says the exact opposite, following in the footsteps of Todd Phillips, right? Like lying to the studio about what your movie is about and then doing the opposite to kind of pull a fast one on everybody. It's one of those two. And I think it's just ineptitude. I have no reason to believe that this is actually some kind of big four-dimensional chess. Like, I think this movie is just straight out not thought through.
To kind of support Jonathan here a little bit, because we both had like a very long spiel about why the things weren't working properly. What I think your point, Jonathan, was about how the father couldn't escape sort of like the trauma, and how like even though he tried to be different from his father, eventually, and forget about the whole like whether that aspect of it was handled well, to kind of like show the father being sort of abusive to, or the grandfather being abusive to the father. But I think, Jonathan, you were kind of like alluding to some of the points about how the father was trying to be different, but ultimately trapped in his rage, and like sort of was sort of unable to sort of escape and like be different to what his father was, and that was like his eventual sort of kind of like demise, what led to him sort of obviously like dying in the end, and not like being able to be with his daughters. That's where like I could see some of it in a sense. And again, I don't know what the director's sort of 100% his vision was, but sort of as I was like kind of like watching, and like as I was like kind of like thinking about it as well, as we're discussing here, that's kind of like part of what like stood out to me was that he's actively trying to like be different from his father. He's like, like you said, he's trying to be a little more gentle and whatever. But sometimes like he kind of like defaults back to sort of what he knows, and like sort of what he experienced as a child. And then you can kind of see, as a metaphor, see his transition of like him becoming a wolf, similar to sort of him becoming his father, and sort of essentially what that danger presents to his family if he eventually becomes like his father.
And he's trying to fight back against that transformation as well. Yeah,
and you can see he's like trying to like hold on to sort of the humanity in him as well. And he seems to kind of like, or from what we're showing, like hold out a little bit longer than sort of what others were able to possibly do in this movie. But it's a sense of sort of what happens when you can't be different, or what happens when sort of you're not able to sort of escape your past or escape the trauma, and sort of the impact of that, and how like the people around you are affected by you being that way, essentially.
The grandfather was not like that because he was a werewolf. It's not like this runs in the family, and every man in the family, or every member of the family, however you want to slice it, becomes that eventually, and he's been fighting it. I've watched and read stories like this, right, where there's kind of some kind of family curse or something, and there's some kind of evil in the bloodline, and somebody who knows this is what they're heading towards, but they're trying to avoid it or delay it. I've seen stories like this. And this is not what happens here. The father became the wolf man after the son left, long after, like at least 15 years.
There's moments in, the scene between him and his dad where you could tell that he's scared of his father, especially when he puts on the sternness voice. I think there was a scene where he asked him to relay to him what he said, because he realized he wasn't concentrating. And then in that scene, you could tell that he like when the father said, "Yo, listen, you need to switch on, you need to listen, blah blah blah," you could tell like he was like not petrified, but you could tell that he was scared. And moments like that, that's why like moments like that tells me all that I need to know. I don't need to see like a whole 15-20 minute interactions that the son had with the dad that tells us that he's abusive or whatnot. I think moments like that should tell you as the audience that, okay, this must be an example of the type of relationship that he had with his dad and why he's so bitter about his past. Just in that moment, especially the way that he reacted to him. So that's why I think as a whole, it's not necessarily that the dad was abusive, but I think that's the type of relationship that he wouldn't want with his own child. That's why he does his best. That's why he like quickly rolls back his anger when he shouts at his daughter because he realized, oh crap, that's something that my dad would do. Let me apologize real quick and explain to him. You know what I'm saying? Let me apologize real quick and let me rectify that.
The relationship doesn't have to be sort of over the top abusive for us to kind of like maybe pick out where there's potential sort of like frictions in the relationship between sort of the father and son, because like you're saying, it's just like those small moments where it makes sort of it's those like small moments where the son's a little bit more fearful of the father, which then builds up over time and builds up over years, where it then adds a bit of a wedge in the relationship between sort of the two characters, and he's maybe like seen it play out in his own relationship that, yeah, my father probably wasn't all that bad, and he probably doesn't like all the way hate him, but at the same time he didn't have the ideal relationship with him just because of sort of how strict and sort of how maybe unapproachable and sort of maybe how to not receive sort of love in the way that he sort of maybe wants to receive, and seeing sort of that drive a wedge between sort of him and his father, where they weren't sort of particularly on sort of the best speaking terms, or they weren't sort of in sort of having the best relationship. He didn't want that to play out with him and his daughter. So in his mind, he probably sees that every time he shouts at his daughter, that's adding a level of fear to his daughter that then sort of drives that wedge and drives that sort of gap in the relationship between them. And he's maybe like a little bit fearful of that, and he's a little bit more sort of cautious of that, which is why he tries to be a little bit more sort of soft, and he tries to be a little bit more sort of warmer to his daughter. And you have that moment where he's like having to remind her that he does love her, like where she puts her hand on sort of his head, and he's like, even though I've had to tell you up, like I do love you essentially, and it's kind of like for this reason, and he's trying to do it in a more gentle way compared to sort of his father. So I can see that, and actually, to be fair, maybe if they were over the top with the abuse, we may have come here and been like, okay, like they kind of like overdid it, and it was like a bit sort of too on the nose, like how abusive the father was. So actually, like probably thinking about it, I do appreciate the little bit more of a subtle touch in terms of sort of trying to interpret how there was sort of a gap in the relationship, and how sort of there was sort of elements that didn't translate well to the son, which he then carries on to the rest of his life. And maybe what could have helped would have been to kind of like see a little bit more examples of sort of how that trauma of sort of being shouted at or being sort of kind of like told off anytime you was in the wrong, and sort of kind of like being fearful of your father figure, or sort of someone like had some type of authority over you, how that played out in sort of other aspects of his life as well.
Isn't it a bit weak if it's just my father yelled at me a few times? It's not even like a real dressing down, right? It's just a little bit, hey, don't do that, right? So it just seems to me like the author just has a pretty warped idea of how that works, because how Blake actually interacts both with his daughter and his wife, it's completely ineffectual. So on the one hand, I think this is what the author believes good parenting looks like. On the other hand, it's portrayed as being completely ineffective, right? Like there's this whole thing, and this is not strictly parenting, but there's the scene when they're making dinner, right? And the wife comes home and is on the phone, and he politely asks her to go to the other room to take the call. She ignores him. He asks again. She ignores him. He asks again. She finishes the call, snaps at him to not do that, right? That basically means that being mild and gentle does not work, right? Like it does not get the most basic of results, right? And I'm not taking.
But it shows that, Daniel.
I'm just saying that is what the movie is saying. I'm just saying if that's all it is, it's pretty weak. And the movie should have done a better job conveying it. If the movie had some kind of message of, like, there's a better way of doing this, then that should have been the way to prevail against the Wolfman.
I think that was the point. I think it was that trait that you're kind of like growing up, like, you grow up with, is something that's always going to be in you. I think it was mainly the fight is what they were trying to kind of convey, was the fight against that hereditary trait. Let's call it that.
But that manifests as him snapping at people twice in totally justifiable situations. Like when he's under stress and when there's real danger and so on. It's not like he's kind of dominating his wife and daughter. And, like, it's just, I don't know, like I've seen other movies, right? And I've seen kind of the strict father, and I've seen like the stifling parenting and everything. And it's so much worse, like so much stronger. And I was so massively unimpressed. But at some point, the movie has to say something, right? If it's just about, hey, getting yelled at as a child is not nice. Okay, is that the entire movie? Is that the entire point?
I think they did show that that's not nice, but at the same time, they showed that it worked as well. So, do you get what I'm saying? And I think that's the main point, because everyone's like, in terms of like just discipline, it's subjective, and I think that is definitely something which they led with, and that's something which they kind of use as a vehicle when it comes to the message of the film. So it's very subjective. Like right now, you're taking it one way, I'm taking it another way. Hervé seems a bit in the middle, but I think he's more swaying towards that he doesn't really like it. But still, do you know what I'm saying? Parenting is very subjective.
The kid doesn't really understand the parents, and I've seen it in real life, in sort of many examples where the parent is doing everything they can out of love for the kid, but the kid just isn't accepting it and isn't really understanding it. It's really hard to even bring up or even defend that point, because the movie doesn't really even stress that it's the child's maybe potentially receiving it wrong, or any type of way.
But how can you say that? The way that the child reacts, though.
More so like us understanding it from the perspective of the child, of the only part where I see it is that when he shouts at his daughter when she's not listening to him when he's gentle parenting, and he's immediately having to reinforce that, no, I still love you and this, that, and the other. And he immediately brings it back, and he's trying to be gentle just because of how she would have received it, and if he'd allowed it to sit on it, maybe it breeds that resentment of constantly being told off by your parent, essentially. But the movie doesn't really necessarily take it anywhere further than that. I can't really see any other examples of it, and I feel like that's the problem with the themes in this, and I feel like it's the problem with with how it's laid out in the movie, because we don't really know what the point of the movie really was, because I know Daniel's arguing the point of they're trying to show that gentle parenting is the best way forward, but at the same time showing it being ineffective in the movie. But it's not really clear either way whether this was meant to be someone trying to get over a generational trauma. It's not really clear to say this movie was trying to point in one direction or the other. I just feel like there isn't really enough there in how the theme is handled, or how things are portrayed, to really say what the director or the writers real thoughts are on it. I can see Daniel probably half disagrees on that, but for me it just seems like there's too many conflicting things in here to really point it one or the other way, because Daniel mentioned, it ends with the mother doing exactly what the father did, and it's really mimicking that same scene essentially.
And that's what the point I wanted to address as well, that Daniel said. Sorry, have a carry on, but I'll address that later on.
No, go on, jump in.
No, but I was gonna say that's the point. They do show the director's message, well, listen, this isn't the right way of parenting. However, he does also show that it works though. And with the mother mimicking the same thing that the grandfather does, which shares the message that, listen, this is the only this is the way of how it should be done. This is the way of how just everything should be done in terms of the parenting, in terms of the way everything went down, just exactly in terms of the events, right? It correlates with the message. It still is consistent with the way that the film was done. It shows, okay, this is bad, but it works. Same with the ending, do you know what I'm saying? So even though they were trying to show that the way that the dad brought up the son wasn't the right way, but it was still a way that worked. That was consistent throughout, consistent with the ending as well.
It's either that or the kid dies. I don't see how that's ambivalent. I think in that situation, it's very clear what the right thing to do is. And there's other things too, right? When they stop and ask for the way, and the guy they talk to has a gun, she immediately freaks out, because her instinct is, I'm from the city. If I see somebody have a gun who isn't a police officer, I'm in danger, right? And so she freaks out, and the dad says, no, it's fine. Everybody around here has a gun, right? And then by the end of the movie, she's the one wielding the gun, right? And she doesn't seem to mind that much, because it's very clearly the right tool in that particular situation that actually is the only way, right? So I think the grandfather is very clearly painted as unsympathetic. I think what the father is trying to do is very clearly painted as sympathetic, but that is then completely at odds with what actually ends up happening in the plot.
But Daniel, I think you took that right. I don't think the father was portrayed as unsympathetic. He was, but at the same time, he was portrayed as a father who loved his son as well, because there were scenes, do you know what I'm saying? Even when he was talking to his friend where he says, I need to protect my son, we need to go and kill this woman to protect my son. And even after he shouts at his son when he runs into the woods and realizes that his son's scared, he kind of tones down a bit and he explains kind of why he's reacting that way. So I think a father who doesn't explain himself or why he's acting the way that he's acting can be portrayed is a trait that's portrayed as unsympathetic. But the fact that he's explaining himself why he's reacting the way that he's reacting, that shows that okay, he genuinely cares. He is sympathetic.
Which undermines the idea that there was something to run away from, right? Because the way the father paints it is, I grew up in a bad household and I got away as soon as I could, and I'm going to do everything different.
He's still a child, and it doesn't mean just because...
Not at that point. At that point, he's the adult, looking back at this and saying, everything my father did was wrong, and I'm going to do the opposite, and that makes me a better person.
When he saw his dad, he was like, damn, I'm a mirror image of my father.
Yeah, and that's the part that I don't buy, because the grandfather becoming a werewolf is just him not being strict enough, right? He got careless at some point. He made a mistake. The werewolf got to him. Like, we can assume that that's how that happened. And he did it. Like, the grandfather dedicated his entire life to preventing this from happening. And eventually, and in the end, he wasn't good enough. But it wasn't because he was too strict. It wasn't because he was too harsh. It's because he slipped up once. So if then thematically we're saying the grandfather turned into a monster in the end, and so sooner or later this will happen with the father, that's not what happens. The father, both of them become monsters because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they didn't pay attention for a split second, and then it was too late. And then then there was no coming back from that. But that is not connected to the parenting or like how nice or how strict they were. It has nothing to do with each other, and that is why it doesn't work.
But that moment there is what disconnects you from the story.
If this was about my father became a monster and I'm on the same path, and sooner or later I will become a monster and I will do everything in my power to stop that from happening, there's something like that there, right? Like,
yeah,
there are lines in the movie that indicate that this is what's happening, but it's the exact opposite of what happens in the movie, okay. And that's my problem. And I don't think that's on purpose. I think that's just sloppiness. I think that's because they didn't think it through. They didn't think through the implications of what happens in the plot. Because if they did, then the father's strictness was what turned him into a monster in the end. But the exact opposite is true. And then the father becomes a monster not because he was too strict or not strict enough or anything like that. It was just chance. And there's nothing he could have done. Like, the only thing he could have done is simply not go to Oregon, right? That was the only way. Just stay away from the monster.
No, that's true. That's true.
So we were already over an hour, so let's maybe move on to maybe the good parts. So just talking about like things that work really well, like everything about I loved everything about the transformation. Like his slow, gradual transformation, the way he kind of loses himself, how the movie shifts between his point of view and the mom's point of view, and how those two, like, the same situation can look completely different depending on whose perspective it is. The wolf vision looked amazing.
When it comes to story, that's what I was like, that is so amazing. It's just, I don't know if that's been done in other werewolf movies, but if it had,
I'm not sure. This quite, yeah.
Yeah.
I think especially in the barn scene, because, you know, when you've got the mother and sort of the daughter's perspective, and you think sort of like they're a little bit safe and everything's like all good, and they've like tried to like set up this trap, and they're like kind of like trying to be like cautious and careful and not make a sound. And then it flips to the wolf vision, and it's like, it doesn't really matter because he can see you clearly. Like, he's got like the clear vision of you. And I feel like that was when it was done at its best for me.
Another thing that I thought was wonderful was when he's kind of in this in-between stage where he's half monster. And so he realizes he's slipping away. It reminded me a little bit of somebody who has like dementia and knows they have dementia and is seeing the signs. And they can't stop it, but they're still there enough to see what's happening. You know what I mean? Like, it's a little, like, I'm not saying it's an allegory for that, but it reminded me a little bit of that, and how terrifying that must be when you realize you are disappearing and there's nothing you can do about it. Like, I've seen like movies where somebody becomes a monster, but I don't think I've ever seen like the first person experience of becoming a monster quite this good. In this script, I really felt for the guy, but that was incredibly well done, I thought.
Like, it felt like a step-by-step tutorial in a way on how to become a werewolf, because how he was becoming a werewolf. So it was just so vivid. I don't know how to explain it, but it was just so vividly done. Like, you're right. I don't think I've ever seen a transformation being shown the way that it was shown in this one.
And I think often it's looking at the monster from the outside, and here we were in his head, right? And like, we were up close to him, everything was filtered through his perceptions, And even just like this whole idea of I'm still here, but I'm disappearing. And like in a few hours, I will be gone. But that part, I think, was the best part of the movie.
And even like with the POV for me, the reason why that was one of the best moments, and like where they kind of like the image kind of became distorted of like his view of his wife and daughter, it kind of like showing to us what in a way animals see. They don't see humans, they just kind of like see food, prey, because that could be kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Like from looking at your wife and your daughter clearly visually like human beings, and then it being distorted the way that was distorted, it's just like the transformation of it and just how, do you know what I'm saying? Just the transformation of that alone kind of explained to me, this is why, you know what I'm saying, werewolves see us as food. You know what I'm saying? They don't even know. But yeah, I'm over exaggerating. I'm just joking a bit. But yeah, it's just
no. But even his like just how he perceives the world is radically different, right? Like there's a scene where he kind of stumbles into the forest and we kind of slide into the wolf vision. Yeah. And the forest looks completely different. I think the sounds are completely different. We hear things we didn't hear before. We can actually see, right? It's actually fairly bright. Like the moonlight is lighting everything up. It's like it's just a different world and a different perception.
Even the spider scene, that one I really liked as well. That got me by surprise. Yeah, it's because like I wasn't expecting that. But the way that happened, I was like, that makes sense. It's not even that it makes sense. That's just so, it's refreshing to see. I feel like I'm learning so much about werewolf transformation, just the way that the spider, but it felt like there was a whole monster in that room.
It was definitely trying to invoke this idea that maybe the wolf is out climbing up the wall or walking on the roof or something, but no, it's just a spider. And you're like, the wolf's hearing is so strong that it sounds like a massive thing. I've seen this in other things, like a lot of vampire stories. When somebody is turned into a vampire, they see everything in a very amplified way. Kind of reminded me of that.
I actually really liked the whole idea of sort of the mother and the daughter finding it difficult to let him go, despite and like clearly seeing sort of how some of the range he was becoming, and sort of how one having, you know, the evidence of like what he's going to become outside because it's chasing him, and two, just kind of like seeing his behavior and sort of like the way he's going, and even like when he was like gnawing at like the scar on his hand or whatever changing, but the idea of like, you know, wanting to hold on to family and wanting to find like a cure and like wanting to save him from becoming this, and like that kind of like desperation. I feel like that was, you know, really well done.
So one thing I wanted to bring up is the audience reaction to this. So this has not gone well, right? So cinema score is a C-, which generally means people didn't like the ending. Like that's kind of the conventional wisdom that if people don't like the ending, they feel bad about the movie, and then if they are prompted for cinema score, they give it a low score. And C- is bad. And then it's currently made after its first week 17 million against a $25 million budget. And the tomato people have it at 52% currently. So a coin flip. Half people recommend it, half don't. Is that justified?
I don't believe so.
So what I would say is that if you look at like responses and discussions about this, a lot of the reaction to it is kind of puzzling. So first of all, the ending, I actually thought the ending was really good. If you just strip out this whole thing about breaking the cycle and all of that, and it's just about a family trying to survive, like where the mom and the daughter end up in the end, quite good. Like this whole saying goodbye to the father and having to shoot somebody you used to love because they've become a danger, and then kind of wandering off into the sunset and kind of being confronted with this vast beauty, like blood-soaked beauty. It's good stuff. I don't know why people don't like the ending.
All of kind of like that stuff that you point out, I didn't mind too much. My problem is by the time we got to it, I felt like it was a bit dragged out, the whole sort of kind of like chase sequence. And, you know, we'd gone from being chased by the grandfather to being chased by the father, all the while knowing that nothing's going to happen to the mother, nothing's going to happen to the daughter as well. So it was just a bit like, yeah, okay, like it's cool. And there was like for sure there was like some like cool visuals in there, like we talked about, especially like the barn scene and stuff like that as well. But it was just a bit like, I know nothing's gonna happen. So by the time we got to like sort of the part where she's having to shoot him, like you definitely felt the emotions there. You definitely felt kind of like the bond sort of between the mother and daughter. But I was just a bit like, okay, just wrap it up, please. Just get to the happy ending, because we've been doing this for a little bit too long for my liking.
I think the sequence where they leave the farm and try to get away with the car, and that doesn't work, so they climb onto the greenhouse, and that doesn't work, so they go back into the barn, like back into the farm. That's a bit dragged out. But the actual ending itself, I thought, like, did you have any problem with that?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I didn't have no problem with it, but it didn't leave me like with sort of a great sense of feeling. Just because by that point, I felt like I was like kind of ready to leave the movie at that point. But the whole, like, especially when it was like calling back to the scene with some of the grandfather and the father, like that piqued my interest again in terms of like how that was like playing out. Because again, like when we saw it with the grandfather, we didn't see the wolf in that part, but like in this situation, it just plays out a little bit differently where she has to make that difficult decision. And it's almost like he kind of like egged her on to make that decision, because he had like one kind of like final look at his daughter and saw like how like afraid she was and this, that, and the other. And it's almost like he was almost like begging for her to shoot him, and she wouldn't do it until, he like was a threat one more time, and then she she had to do it. So you definitely felt like the emotion of that scene for sure.
But like audiences hate it. Like broadly, they're not walking away from this saying, yeah, this was any good. Like people are upset about this, like in large numbers, and are just rejecting it or saying.
What's the reason for it? Because again, like in my mind, it was always going to end this way. Like there was not going to be an ending where mother and daughter died, or like the daughter died, or like or the mother died, or whatever like that. In my mind, they were always going to kind of like walk out as a two, and like whatever happened to the father happened to the father, whether he went wandering in the woods. So I'm not really sure what's kind of like so offensive about this.
This is more upbeat than most horror movies I've seen, right? Like usually, like one person, like the final girl in the end, typically narrowly survives, but there's no triumphant aspect to this. And here it is quite triumphant, right? It's somber because they've lost the dad, but other than that, it's a pretty standard movie ending, right? And then another complaint I've seen is that the Wolfman does not look like a werewolf. It looks like a mangy dog, and that's bad. And the movie like is bad because of that. And I just don't get that at all. I think so. First of all, it does not look like a classic werewolf, right? I was kind of expecting that a little bit because it's called the Wolfman, and it actively invokes like the Wolfman, like the classical Wolfman movie. But like just within its own logic, kind of the Wolfman looks the way I think he should.
The werewolf doesn't look like a generic werewolf. However, the way that the werewolf looked for me was different.
He looks like a mangy dog. That's what I think that makes sense. That fits.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think it is more realistic in a way to any other werewolf if there was ever to be a man who actually turns into a werewolf in the world. You know what I'm saying? So for me, I enjoyed that. And in terms of the ending, I do agree with her. I didn't see there being any other way that the film was going to end. I think for me that was a great ending. So like I said, I think people just didn't kind of like enjoy the minimalistic approach. I think they're kind of used to a lot happening in a film.
Yeah.
And just,
is this audiences punishing a filmmaker for being a little bit different?
I feel like it, and it's annoying because people scream for original stuff. They say that they're tired of repurposed IPs, like just reusing IP. So this one is an original story, which I liked. So, and I don't think their opinions are warranted. However, it is what it is, man.
Yeah, it's just I don't see the criticism. Like, okay, like I like the classic werewolf look that comes in a bunch of different guises, right? If you reject a movie because you have like an image in your head what it should be, and then it's not that, therefore it's bad, it seems reductive and not very productive. And I think the question should be, does this creature design support the movie? And yeah, I think it's a feral creature. It's more animal than monster. It's feral. It's diseased. You can see just a little bit of humanity still shining through, but just a little. It works.
The whole point of it was like you still kind of had to have like some semblance of his human features, or like some type of like semblance of like who the man was behind the werewolf, and it had that. And I feel like there was like enough kind of like scenes in there of like his like kind of like claws coming through and stuff like that, where it was just like really well done, where you can kind of like see, okay, like this person's like clearly transforming into something different. I mean, I didn't have like many expectations, so maybe I'm like the wrong person to answer for all the people that are upset about the design and stuff like that. But for me, it completely worked. It was like completely fine for someone that had just been infected and was slowly transitioning. It's like I'm not expecting them to be like full blown werewolf at that point.
And if he was a full blown werewolf, then
Well, it's semantics whether you call this a werewolf or not, but it's the Wolfman, right?
Yeah,
Like they tie this very superficially to some Native American mythology, and I would doubt that there's much there. But they explicitly don't say werewolf, right? I think a lot of the Wikipedia summary calls it a werewolf, but they don't actively invoke like the classical werewolf a lot. And the werewolf story is very flexible, right? Like it's been everything from being close to nature to like toxic masculinity to like puberty and menstruation, like everything. Like the werewolf can be pretty much anything. You just have to make it work within the confines of your story. So like this idea that it has to be this, like it's a bit like saying Nosferatu, like, but we had this with Nosferatu too, right? Where people thought Count Orlok looked funny because he didn't look like Bela Lugosi, right? Same thing.
Yeah.
Like
I don't get to it. I can understand how an aesthetic look can affect a viewer's experience. However, I don't agree that it should ruin it to the point where it's classified as a terrible movie. That's just ridiculous. Like, for example, I'm saying the reason why I say that is because of the whole Superman costume. Like the new Superman costume, I'm a bit iffy about it. However, it's not stopping. Like it's not like giving me like a prejudgment of this film. It's gonna be a terrible film. Now I'm like, okay, I'm not really a big fan of the way that the suit looks. However, I'm still anticipating. I'm still ready to watch the movie. So if that, like the whole werewolf look is something, or Wolfman look is something which has ruined the experience for the viewer, I think that is a terrible reason.
I think on some level you need to engage with what the movie is offering, and it either works for you or it doesn't. And like on the creature design front, I think this really worked for me. Just didn't work on a thematic level, but everything else I think was pretty much where it should be. So it just like the negativity I saw like in the discourse around it was just surprising to me. It just looked like people were looking for something to complain about, as opposed to actually kind of taking the movie on its terms and then seeing if that works or not. I don't know.
Last thoughts.
I still actually think I'm confused as to whether I like it or not from the first part. It's a cool movie. I probably won't watch it again. I don't think it's one that you have to like really avoid. I wouldn't say it's like a bad movie. It's cool. I feel like I enjoyed myself enough with this movie to be a little bit more positive than negative. I do agree that the themes don't tie too well with the plot, and I feel like when Daniel emphasized the point about how there isn't the causation between becoming a wolfman and the themes within the story. It's like, okay, clearly there's a disconnect, and clearly there was something that went wrong in terms of the writing process of this movie and how the story was meant to unfold. Away from that, there's still like quite a lot to enjoy in this. Again, for me, highlights were like the werewolf transformation. Some of the scenes that we got towards the end of the movie, even though for me it was a little bit like played out at certain parts, but I think overall, I give this a 5 out of 10. We'll go straight down the middle. 5 out of 10.
For me, this is probably the first. Yeah, this is gonna be the first movie of 2025 that I'm gonna rewatch again. So we go watch this movie again on the weekend. I really enjoyed this film. It was a simple film, but I think it was simply executed to not perfection, but it was executed really well. I think the suspense was amazing. It's not like filled with jump scares, which is actually something which was really good. Like there are jump scares, but it's not like the jump scares which are corny. It's like the jump scares that make sense, but it's mainly a film filled with suspense, which I really, really liked. Overall, I was invested in the character, like just the stories of the character, and it was just a really good, not werewolf movie, but a Wolfman film. I would definitely recommend this film, and I'm going to give it I'm not going to be too risky. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Better than Madam Web.
Oh yeah, whatever, man. Yo, are we still in 2025? Are we still gonna crucify Madam Web?
All right. So for me, on a plot level, excellent. On a mood level, really good. Characters are at least fine. Pacing of it is great. We didn't really talk much about that, but it's a short movie, 100 minutes, so well under 2 hours. So that's good. Very linear, very straightforward. Just tells this story, and it tells it well. The first person experience of turning into a monster was done better than I think I've seen anywhere. The effects were at least fine. Nothing too stupid or weird or something like. A lot of movies are cluttered up with nonsense that kind of drag the whole thing down, and this just wasn't. This was a very clean, straightforward story. It's the thematic level that I even after our conversation, I still think it just does not work together with what the movie actually shows. I think those two things were not thought through. I don't think those things are reconciled. And both parts are too big to completely ignore. Right? So you have to take them both together, and together they don't work. That really impairs my enjoyment of the movie. If it was just a line or two, and otherwise it's a straightforward movie about a guy who turns into a monster and becomes a danger to the people he loves, that would be a wonderful story. But it's not that, right? It's the two pieces are each too significant to ignore. And so for that reason, I give it 5 emotional scars, and I leave it at that.
Hi guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's debate. I think we haven't had it was a discussion, but we haven't had like a discussion / debate in quite a while. I think we agreed on most of our movies that we reviewed. But Hervé.
Yeah, I mean, let's know your thoughts down in the comment section below. How do you think the movie handled its themes? Do you feel like they handled the whole topic of generational trauma well in this movie, or do you feel like they just kind of like dropped the ball on it and didn't give it enough attention that it needed? Whatever your thoughts, let us know in the comment section down below. And of course, if you enjoyed our discussion, tell a friend. And if you hated everything we talked about today, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Okay, boy.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.